Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Creative Workshop, where we delve into creative process. I am Max Randolph, and today with me is Trevor Collins. How you doing, buddy?
Max, it is so good to see you. Thank you for having me. I'm very excited not only to be talking to you again since our Beery and Curie adventures in another life and another podcast, but also just to be chatting with you about creativity. I admire your work. I'm so happy to see it all behind you again. And I don't know. I'm very excited.
Stop that right now. This is about you, my friend.
Do you have a name for your audience so I can break the fourth wall and talk to them? Because audience, I am so eager to get this man to talk about himself. Maybe that's my role here is I'll flip the tables.
What's happening? This is terrible. Oh my God. Trevor, you are such a creative guy, being a producer, a creative director. But first, I have to reiterate, you mentioned Beery and Curie. You're getting me all wound up already. We met on the best terms possible. You know what I mean? Like we met on like a D&D-esque TTRPG. And I feel like that might be the way people are supposed to meet.
They need to have speed dating in D&D but also this party was amazing. It was such a giving, warm, yes and environment where Don had laid this beautiful like fabric for you guys to all like weave your stories into. And it was just, I was happy to be a part of it. But yes, meeting you all there was wonderful because I didn't realize how many, like we were mutuals. I was mutuals with Tori and Don. And so then meeting Charlotte, yourself and everybody else, just like, it was a wonderful experience.
Yeah, it was perfect because I feel like when we meet professionals on like a professional way, well, what even is that, right? But you always have like your practiced answers for stuff like, hello, everyone, I'm Max Randolph, I'm a blacksmith artist or whatever. Like there's something like getting to know each other when you're on your back foot, when you're totally improvising and, it's a great way to meet somebody. Anyways.
It really is. I know you wanted to talk about it, so I'll force the segue because I love this woman, but improv, you drop your guard and it's really where you get to know people and you express a not truer, but true form of yourself. And that is how my fiance and I got to know one another. We had known each other for years, but it wasn't until we did improv together. Yeah. Where we really started to go, hold on a second. This person's so we grew as friends. And then as we became very, very close friends, we started to go, hold on a second. We're completing each other's sandwiches. And then off we went.
I love this, but I didn't realize that. Also, congratulations on your
thank you so much.
On your engagement, buddy.
Thank you. Yeah, the clock's a ticking. We're gonna get wedded soon, and we're very, very excited. But also, the one person I didn't say from Unpredicted Party, Zach. I just wanted to name drop everybody. Full credit, full love to everybody.
The one guy that was like totally fanboying over you the entire time.
Oh, no. I had to make him wait for it. You know what I mean?
You got to keep him waiting, right? Speaking of fanboying, like Zach is over here. He knows you through Rooster Teeth, a YouTube dynasty. You're such a talented guy. Like, would you introduce yourself now that we already know each other? Would you please introduce yourself to my community?
Yes. I'm going to call your community the crafts people, right? Because we've got the craftsmen, the craftswomen of the world out there. Yeah, dude. So I come from a very interesting background that I'm sure many of you will appreciate, which is engineering. I studied engineering at Purdue University, and I went there for aeronautical and aerospace engineering. I love that stuff. I love creative problem solving. It's what drove me to engineering. And as part of that, I also love telling stories. I think there's an innate storytelling love that we all have. My dad's a musician, and so I kind of had this underbelly of like wanting to tell stories, wanting to make things. And so coming out of college, I didn't know what I wanted to do. I definitely went down the engineering path and had some wonderful jobs, but I also had a lucky opportunity after kind of trying to make some content online on YouTube in those early days. And I had a very lucky opportunity where people at Rooster Teeth identified me as part of as the community, but also then they grew, they needed an editor. So I came in and I was very grateful that it was such a welcoming environment that encouraged me to try new things and push myself and apply myself. And so from that, I kind of went from editor to producer to supervising producer to creative director and a cast member. And just, I had the opportunity to wear too many hats and I learned a lot, and it was so fun. But yeah, that's the kind of pathway I took. And I'm sure, as you see, Max, through this podcast, that there is an infinite supply and an infinite number of paths one can take. And I love hearing about everyone's journeys, and that's kind of mine in a nutshell.
I like that. I didn't realize you had such a background in engineering. That's fascinating. I never graduated from Purdue, but
we could have been classmates.
It's so fascinating, just how things work. There's just, don't get me going. Don't get me going on engineering, because
I know you know how things work, because like your drawings, like yes,
or unmotion, planned unmotion.
Yeah. I feel like you have this really innate or maybe learned experience with like mechanical engineering and how like springs apply leverage to a lever that then pulls out. Like I just love some of the things that you've designed, both in Unpredicted Party, but just in your life, whether it be the iron tree or the iron oak, I should say, and just all the stuff that you've made with it.
Because like my teacher was like destruction. Like I would just take stuff apart ever since I was a little kid. I would just take things apart and understand how it worked. So like creation through destruction a little bit.
Yes. Oh my God. I remember as a kid, I appreciate this. My elementary school had the Y program. So for kids who wouldn't take the bus home because there wouldn't be, I was young. I was like, for a while, it was me and my baby sister. So my parents were working. So I'd stay a little bit, like an hour and a half after school. And part of that, you'd have art and other like sports and stuff. But every once in a while, they would bring out like an old radio or an old this or that you could then take apart and look at the insides. And man, I took that to the next level when I went home, and these Furbies, you remember those? I had a Furby. Oh, yeah. And it like did nothing but scare me. It was like I was a hunter and a butcher, and I took its skin off, and then I saw the hideous beast underneath, and I said, well, this is more terrifying. And so I started unscrewing whatever I could find and just seeing, okay, well, how does the mouth open and whatever. And I got it all the way down to its little motor that drove everything. And I was like, whoa. And so then I started looking at batteries, and I would like take the wires to the motor and put it on different batteries. I found a 9-volt, and I got it really whizzing. And it's just, I love that. I love the idea of creation through destruction.
You mentioned storytelling. You are a master storyteller, by the way. And
thank you.
I feel like that super shines through, that natural proclivity that you have towards that of storytelling into Red Web. I feel like Red Web really channels that the most. And that is like your biggest project right now, right?
Yeah, that's the one I'm cooking on right now. It's one that I launched 4.5 years ago now during quarantine, just in a version like this. While we were all home, my co-host Alfredo Diaz and I launched that at home. And yeah, my love for mysteries and the unknown mixes with storytelling. And I love kind of the immersive storytelling using needle drops and music cues to kind of heighten it. But then I also love letting Fredo dive in, ask questions, but also throw a wrench in and sprinkle a little bit of like comedy and some of that improv throughout as we.
I was about to say, speaking of improv.
Yeah.
So you're doing like an Unsolved Mysteries. Did you remember being a kid and hearing that music for Unsolved Mysteries? How terrifying that was.
Yeah, it was groovy though.
It was heavy. It went way too hard. It had no business going that hard.
Yeah. I'm like, well, is this charting? Like, why is this so good?
There's got to be like a Unsolved Mysteries, like lo-fi or dubstep out there somewhere.
Oh, absolutely. And if not, someone out there in the crafters should make it, because I'd be listening.
The world needs this. Speaking of reverse engineering, right? Taking things apart, and I want to reduce you down to your little motor. I want to put a 9-volt battery and get you whizzing. But like, was there an original tale? Right? Was there some lore that got you excited originally about, these unsolved mysteries, these happenings?
That's a great question. And I really haven't thought about it. It really does go back to unsolved mysteries. Like there would be summers where I would watch TV, right? And I had an iteration of like Unsolved Mysteries, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, and then something else before I then would go off and play video games. And I think through that, I really started to like the idea of like, oh, but what could be, what is, even stuff that's a little bit more out there, like ancient aliens. I like the idea of like looking at history and saying what could be from history. It doesn't mean I subscribe to it. I'm very practical and grounded in our analysis on Red Web, but it doesn't stop me from wanting it to be aliens. I'm like 99.9% is not aliens, but I'm waiting for it, you know?
That 1% is a lot of fun.
That 1% is where we dance, you know?
Ooh.
Yeah. And so we've done ghost hunts because I love ghost hunting shows like Taps and Ghost Adventures. Like there's a lot of entertainment to be had, but I love bringing the authenticity to it too, because not only is there history to be had, there's some geeking out on like various cultures to be had when you talk about folklore in mysteries. And so, you know, we've brought all of that into the arena. We tap into true crime, absolutely, but we talk about internet unsolved mysteries. That's caught my attention, like how websites can like have these nefarious, underhanded things going on in the back end. And I don't know, I've been grateful that the task force, we call them, has enabled us to broaden our genre of true crime. And so we're in supernatural, we're in unsolved mysteries, we're in true crime and disappearances and cryptids. And those are all arenas I just love dabbling in because
there's so many tales, and the good on you for reaching out, right? Like,
yeah,
let people be proud of their local lore, you know?
Yes. Recently, we talked about the Puckwudgie. I'd never heard of this thing, but as a boy from Indiana, apparently it's a big thing. And like, obviously, like the more the Northeast, but there's a hot spot in like Indiana that I'm like, I had no idea. But you know, when I really think about it, and this is fascinating, you've kind of kindled this thinking, is like, what drew me to aerospace and aeronautical engineering was I loved the stars. I loved space because it is filled with the unknown. And so I wanted to explore. I wanted to like get in there. How do I get into a satellite team? How do I launch a probe off to go check out Mars or, you know, anything else, right? And so I've always had a piece of like curiosity. And so I don't know, I've just been chasing that curiosity ever since. And so sometimes it takes different forms.
You nailed it with the unknown, because it's like, I feel like space is the unknown incarnate, right? It's the darkness. And when we're talking about storytelling, especially when it comes to culture, when it comes to folklore, especially spanning, different people, because we all have kind of similar veins. Like there's nothing more uniting than just like storytelling. Like, when we were all like growing up camping out on a cattle ranch and stuff like that, you know, when you spend your life around a campfire and behind you is darkness, is space, is the unknown, it is the most human thing to do. Is just like, watch out for the Lupin monster, or I grew up with, no, I'm totally lost.
You got it. Come on.
I got it. It's on the tip of my tongue.
Pull it out of the
Snipe hunting.
Yes. What is that?
Snipes. As a kid,
yes.
There was a call. You know, it's a total hazing thing. But you had a call. You had to hit a paper bag, and it would fly into it, and then they would take you way out into the darkness, and then leave you for dead. And you had to make it back to the camp somehow.
Right. Yeah. I think there's nothing more human, right? At the core of the experience. You talk about sitting around campfires. Let's go back to the cavemen, right? You know, what's more human and societal than telling stories? And also, honestly, there's the morbid part of it, which is being scared of the unknown. You have to be aware of the unknown. And now we have this safety because we're the apex monster of this planet, that we can now look into the abyss and go, I'm kind of curious. What is the unknown?
What's in there?
From the safety of our rooms and stuff. But you had me thinking too, and I do want to turn the question back on you, because I think that's a fascinating question. The genesis of someone's curiosity and their storytelling.
Yeah.
What drove you as an interesting lad who has a proclivity for mechanics and an interest in storytelling? What drove you to blacksmithing, and what made that your vessel for creativity?
Ooh, okay. I see what you did there.
We're playing tennis. We're playing tennis.
Well, I would create stories for myself to enjoy. Child is gonna kick you in the pants. I don't care if you had like what kind of upbringing you had. It's gonna challenge you. And I would create stories for myself to make it through. And I think so much of that creativity came from just like creating an internal world. And I took to metalworking really easily. It turns out it was in my family for like ever. And I didn't know that. I didn't grow up with any of my, them as mentors or teachers in any way. And I didn't realize that I can connect the two. I can like go to my forge and then come back with an artifact of that internal world. A thing, a real life thing that I get to share with people and be understood for a second,
Yes. Isn't that so cool? Like, I think that's another reason why I love engineering, but also content creation, but also storytelling, is that you can have a thing in your mind and it can become a tangible item. And that's just so wild. And I mean, what is any job but creating some sort of tangible item out of thin air? We're doing magic. Absolutely. We're doing alchemy out here.
Dude, here we are. And yes, buddy, you got it. You're doing it, Peter. Yes.
I'm doing it.
What this is for, what this, the creative workshop is for, is to inspire you guys to be your best creative self. Because I feel like we are at our best when we're creative, when we're enjoying creativity. Because going back to our conversation about our roots in a cave or under a tree, like around a fire with our people, giving each other history to the generation below us, history, lore, techniques, artisanship. That is such a unifying thing. And in such an age of, separatism, and not to get too dark and dreary, but like there's a lot of like us versus them kind of idealism. And we got to celebrate what unifies us. And that is story, that is, joy, creativity, all of that stuff. And that's what we're here to do. So I'm going to ask you another question, buddy.
Yeah, let's get in there.
Were you always eager to create? Did you always have that insatiable need to be like productive?
I feel like I was always very self-driven. I knew what I wanted out of myself, whether it be like just to get the job done, right? With homework. Like, well, I want to get the job done, but now I want to impress myself and improve upon myself. I got to get the A, or I got to raise that C to a B or whatever.
Were you an A student?
I tried to be. I was like A's and B's, I prided myself on not having any C's until I took some really tough classes in like college and high school. And I was like, all right, perfection is the death of good, or whatever they say. And so let me just strive for, being happy with what I am able to accomplish and not kicking my own self. But it's a very wonderful question, because I think we all come out the womb in some way creative. And I think that spark can get stifled by stress. Speaking from my own experience, by stresses or anxieties or fears or perfectionism, right? That's certainly prevented me from continuing any sort of path. Is like, well, it's not going to start perfect, so just don't do it, which is terrible. But I do remember as a kid, like sitting there and kind of like playing with these. I love, like, I had like little action figures, all sorts of toys and things, and they could, like, their joints could move. And so I would do like DBZ fights with them. And I would like have these dialogues happening in my head so I'm sure my parents just sitting me watching me for like half an hour as I'm like silently just going, we're on a podcast, but it's all happening in my head, right? Sound effects.
For those listening, it is full, Dragon Ball Z unfolding. The announcer, the sound effects.
Yes. And then as soon as my sister was old enough, only 3 years difference really, so what wasn't too long, but as she was old enough, I would love to set up obstacle courses for her. I also have like two cousins about my same age that at the time were wonderful storytellers, great imagination. We fed into that for each other. And so it was always like making up games for one another, making up stories as we're kind of skulking through the woods of my cousin's backyard. But yeah, I think that's really the foundational creativity that we had and explore. I think imagination is the first iteration of storytelling and creativity, right?
That's beautiful. That's where it begins, right? Play, and you mentioned so aptly is like when, is the perfectionism and all of these super negative expectations that we put on ourselves. I need to have an A, or this project that I'm working on, this totally creative project that I'm suffocating the life out of by making it perfect. Do you struggle with, being a perfectionist?
Honestly, still I do. And I'm grateful that in my youth, I was able to learn some tougher lessons in a safer environment, right? Like when I got slapped with my first C, I was like, this sucks. It's everything to me. Why is it? It's existential. It's my job in the future. It's my GPA before that. And so in that environment, it isn't everything. I'm a freshman. I can figure this out. I can change that. I can improve, right? And so in those environments, I think it's a valuable asset to be able to self-improve, but also self-reflect and be like, is that everything? Let's take it down off the pedestal and be like, cool, it isn't. It's a good motivator, but don't hurt yourself for it. But still to this day, even with Red Web, there's times I was talking to the team just last week, and there's ideas that we've been cooking on for like years, but haven't had the time or resources to do. And now I'm kind of just like, I also realize I've held myself back because it couldn't start the right way. It couldn't start the way I envisioned it. So I didn't do it. But I'm like, but the audience is amazing and they're so supportive. I would rather have something out there than nothing, And so like, let's look at the first couple steps that get us across a finish line and then worry about iterating later. And then the other element is definitely anxiety. I think that is, I'm so happy in a weird way that it's such a talked about conversation, because I think at least when I was younger, it was not really identified. It wasn't spoken about. It could be a weakness, or you just didn't know what it was. And I'm glad there's a name for this entity now. But I want to hear what you think on this. But I heard this like in the last week or two, and it was somebody who was very emotionally intelligent. And I was trying to take this all in, and I'm not informed enough to be able to speak further, but she was assessing all these negative emotions and how you can kind of approach them. And she was like, anxiety, its antithesis is creativity. And sometimes it's just reorienting your room. Sometimes it's just starting a thing that you've been meaning to do, whether it be sweeping the floors, or maybe it is making a short film, something big. But just like being creative in any sense, writing something down, telling a story, whatever, like journaling, it's the opposite. And so I've been thinking about that ever since I heard it. And I'm really curious to hear not only your take, but please, like, let me know like your answer on all that.
That is absolutely brilliant. It strips you of all the joy, because I feel like when I talked about creativity being the best version of ourselves, it's a sense of play. Creativity is just play. It's it's like, just like I said, the best version of ourselves. And that anxiety, those are other people's words. I feel like those are other people's expectations. Those are people's rules they've put on us that we've learned how to repeat to ourselves. Trevor, have you ever done The Artist Way?
You know what? That's ringing a bell, but please, like, elucidate me.
I did it was like a 14-week thing on it. Mm-hmm. There was a friend of mine, a colleague that I met just online, and he wanted to put me through the class. And it's a book, and it's this like weekly thing that you do. And there's a lot of healing. There's a lot of psychology involved. And it doesn't mean that you're like, oh, I'm going to read the book, so I'm going to become a world famous, playwright or something like that. Sure, if you do, right on. But it could just be like, how do I stop kicking my own pants? Creativity permeates everything. Like you mentioned, do something creative about like, how do I rearrange my space? Rearranging, or like, how do I arrange the dishwasher for complete optimization? Creativity is so important, and it's intrinsic to our humanity. And I'm really trying to inspire people to reclaim it for themselves, because they already have it. It's been buried by others around them and themselves.
I love that. That's an amazing mission to have. And all the more reason why I'm grateful to be able to be on this podcast and wax poetic about play, honestly, because I'll be honest too. I'm so happy you said that, because so many times I stop and think like, is this self-serving? Is this the delayed maturity of an individual? This idea of streaming games for a living, which I've done, or making a podcast, which I've done. Like, so I'm not trying to belittle anything. Like, is this just like the lack of maturity, or am I trying to stay as a kid? And I'm like, no, but like, also, is there something wrong with that? You know what I mean? Like, there are times you be a kid. There's times and places to be an adult, and there's times and places to bring that mature perspective. But there's also, I think, an importance to art and storytelling, especially, honestly, now, but anytime. Anytime you could, like, drop throw a dart at your dartboard of all of humanity, and you'll find a year where I could make the argument for art's importance at that time.
Okay, so you're talking about content creation. I have another question for you, buddy. I heard this really interesting interview with a very famous, very successful music producer, and he says, are you making your content for your audience, or are you making it for you, Trevor? Who are you making your content for?
That is an amazing question. So Red Web was a complete guilt trip of a passion project. When I'm standing there with a man named Jeff Ramsey, you should check him out, audience. He works on a podcast called Regulation Podcast. He was my mentor and boss for quite some time, great friend of mine still. And we're sitting there at our whiteboard in a room dedicated to gameplay. We had 2 channels, we goofed around, and it was an amazing time. But we're also like, let's talk about podcasts. What would you want to do? Do you want to have a writing podcast? You want to do this? He had like a dozen written on the board already. And I'm like, well, I love mysteries. I love like scary stories. I love supernatural. And so I'm just like, what about something like that? And so we wrote that down. And that was just like, I'm in a gaming department, like primarily, and I'm sitting here thinking about true crime. So all that is to say is like, yeah, it all came from what felt like self-serving, but I'm like, but if I feel this passionately about this, someone else must also feel this passionately about this. And I would love to fill that gap for whoever that person might be, whether it's 1 or 1 billion. I just want to do it to make myself feel like happy and fulfilled, but also, see if I could provide that enjoyment for others,
Trevor, I'm freaking out. You said the thing.
I said that thing. What did I say? Yes!
Passion. Dude, passion is contagious.
Passion, more energy, more passion.
Yeah, exactly. It's the best thing in the world.
I don't know if we want to get all the way into this, because like I'm a huge Kendrick Lamar fan, and that like the rap beef between Kendrick and Drake. And
huge.
There's so much like to read into his lyrics. He's an amazing lyricist, an amazing musician. And as part of that conversation, I only bring that up because as part of that conversation, and it wasn't directly about it, but tangentially related, there was a guy who once said, like, are you making something for yourself, or are you making something for others? If you're making art, this is his definition. Art is when you're making something for yourself. You're expressing yourself. You have something to say. But if you're making it for somebody else, and it's part of the rap beef, maybe I shouldn't have brought it up, but like if you're making something for somebody else, that's commerce, which is fine. There is a role for that, but I think you need to, like, especially as the one creating, it's important to delineate what that is, because then it changes what your expectations are for yourself, for the item, and it removes pressures and kind of guides you where to go.
You're just over here dunking on me, buddy. This is crazy.
What are you talking about?
That was beautiful. That was absolutely beautiful. That is so well said, bud. People can feel it. People can feel it when you're passionate, and when you're bringing that level of passion to it. Like it's you can't help it.
Yeah.
It could be someone reading the phone book, but if you have that person that is so utterly obsessed with phone books,
you're like, I gotta hear him say the next name,
God, this is amazing.
there that kind of exists. There's some amazing calligraphy writers out there.
Yes.
And they stream with these beautiful fountain pens, and they just stream, and like you have that ASMR of the scratch on the paper, on the parchment. And people will come in and be like, my name is Sophie. Could you write my name? And they'll be like, Sophie, here it is.
I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yes.
I feel like that's the crux of, putting yourself out there, right? Like, it's like, oh, well, will they like if I did this? I'm trying to like placate. I'm trying to like, I'm trying to root out what people want to see. They don't want to see anything that they want to see what you have to offer. Be you. Because, oh gosh, I think it's an Einstein quote, but like, it's literally as simple as just be yourself. Everyone else is taken. And I just love that.
I totally agree. Absolutely. And I also think too, and I've, don't get me wrong, I've fallen prey to it where there's times where I go, I think that this is what that audience or this audience might want. And sometimes you do nail it. And the question is, what role are you trying to fulfill, right? Not everything can be self-fulfillment. Not everything can be pure commerce, right? There's a good balance to strike, and it's its own skill. But yeah, it's again, it's quantifying which of the things, and but also like you I don't know. I think it's important too to not get too caught up, because I think a lot of people in the early phases of making something, building a community, starting a project, they do get caught up in the self-analysis, which is a double-edged sword of like, well, what are they going to want? How can I be that thing? And I think there was a community member who told me when I was still under 100 subs on YouTube, like 12 years ago, they were like, I was very vocal about my goals and I really wanted to build community from the ground up. And I was so grateful from the beginning that I found some amazing people. And I was like, we did it. We've grown to 100 faster than I could imagine. And part of that conversation was, what do you want out of me? And they were like, no. We want to watch what you want to make. And I was like, it cut a string loose on me or something. I was like, oh, you are here for what I am making. And there is value to being unique and not fitting some mold. And yeah, I don't know.
Okay. So being such a creative guy yourself, are there any like rituals that you do to get into that creative mindset?
I feel like it's always churning, but I don't know if I have any rituals. I feel like it's always happening. As if you can't tell by how much I talk, I feel like ADD. So there's like 10% of my brain is consistently dedicated to just like biddly, biddly, biddly. But I think honestly, sometimes if there's any ritual to it, it's just sitting there, closing my eyes, turning off all the senses, and really just like visualizing the thing, visualizing a final product, and then I'm like, this is what I would want to have. Like this video, I would like to have that at the end.
You almost do like a manifestation.
Honestly, there's something to it. It guides your decision making. If you just have a clear goal, it helps, it helps your Bandersnatch decision branching. You know what I mean?
That's a reoccurring question that I ask all of my guests. And what's so cool is I get a different answer every time, wildly different, because we got to normalize it. Creativity is one of the most personal things that we have. It's so locked within us that we got to normalize the creative conversation. We can talk about processes. We got I think it's such important work to like just get it out there, to unpersonalize it a little bit and show that we all have a little bit of self-doubt. We all have, a little bit of imposter syndrome and stuff like that. Like for me with my creative process, like some type of caffeine, it could be tea, coffee, whatever. Music, evocative music. So we have actually quite a different process. You go into like full sensory deprivation.
I feel like there are times where I definitely like overstimulate and that lets me focus. And then there's times where I just go, let me just think. And I enter a meditative kind of thing, but like walk me through. Do you wake up and you're like, all right, I'm going to have this hot tea. I'm going to sit on my porch. I'm going to have a croissant, and I'm going to blast some, like, what's the music that brings it to you?
Very different playlists for different things. Okay. Well, let me talk about it. So
music, I love music. Get in.
You mentioned, different hats. Mm-hmm. There's so many different hats. Sometimes I'm going out in the workshop where I need to be like a little bit more aggressive. I need to be a little like harder. But when I'm in the design studio, it's such softness, celebrating joy, curiosity, and things like that. So like I'll have different like playlists where, like I have a 12-part series, sculpture series where I'm capturing, the zodiac constellations. It's for a resort. So they have like this like star walk that you can take and you can like meditate at each, Scorpius and so on and so forth. But I'm not just building the zodiac symbols. That's too easy. So what I'm doing is I'm using stained glass discs, actually capturing the constellations, but putting them in a 3-dimensional orientation, because we're usually seeing them on a flat plane, actually making them unrecognizable around the sides and stuff, because things are closer. And so these two stars might be right next to each other from our eyes, but they're actually like that,
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And for me, like, the music is like, sacred Gregorian chants and basso profundo music, like trying to capture the heavens through music and stuff. A lot of J.S. Bach.
Are you a man of many tastes? Is there a genre, like, are you the kind of person that says, I love all genres minus this one? Or do you just like, you'll swing from cello suite number 5 all the way to like hip hop, all the way to country and pop and rock? And like, are you kind of fluid through there, or are there trends in your life?
There's definitely a place in my heart for all of it, right? And it's very time and space. Like if Casey and I go out to the club or something like that. Not that we do that much these days, but boy, I like to boogie. Like I'll get down with anything. Or if it's this nice country bar and they're blasting country music, like right on, dude. That was my whole childhood. It's fun to like adjust yourself into different lenses. I feel like it's such a good practice. Back to D&D and stuff like that. You almost like channeling yourself through different fonts.
That's a great way to put it. Like today, what fonts am I going to express myself as? I love that.
It's a lot of fun, and just like constantly being under self-discovery is always important. Okay. If you wouldn't mind, like we jive so well together, and it's almost impossible not to be just entirely positive with you, because you're a wonderful guy.
I appreciate that.
Can we get a little dark?
Yeah, let's do it. Let's get to the real stuff sometimes.
Okay. Because creativity is a grind. It can be brutal. It could be uproarious victories, but also some deep battles. So my question to you, buddy, how do you fend yourself from your inner critic?
From the inner critic. Sometimes it's just doing it and getting lost back in the sauce. You don't have time to think about like self-doubt if it's clicking and working and the reminder. Sometimes it could be a bad thing to have to rely on like the feedback right there. There were times, like at Rooster Teeth, we had RTX, which was a live event. And that was almost like this annual battery recharge, because when you're making stuff online, you could see comments, but it's really easy for things to become, I hate to say it, but over years, like dehumanized, where things get distilled into a number, especially if it's a company, a business, an effort, whatever. And you're just looking at bottom lines or whatever. But like to see people in person and to like engage with them, hold their hand and talk about how they like inspire you and you inspire them, and how there is this sort of communication through comedy, content, art, whatever form it takes. It's re-energizing. And so that always helped as like a reminder. But other times it's just it's trying to kind of learn the tools of therapy and understand that it's okay to not be fully impressed with yourself all the time, that like being not okay is okay. And like being like, all right, I've built a confidence like with my ability to do things. I know it's there. So I know that I can trust myself. I've built like a blind trust that I have to just go, I can't see it right now, but I know I can trust myself. Right now, I'm really lost in it. I'm really lost in the dark and I'm not feeling super happy with myself, but I know that I can achieve something, or I know that I've built that thing, or I've made that video or whatever. And, but how about you? Like, do you ever have times where you're just kind of frozen up in that? And
oh my God, all the time. Get out of it?
Yeah.
It's brutal. And no matter what your achievements, like it's always there, just kind of pestering you like a little parrot, like a little negative Nancy parrot, It is brutal, like and no one can hurt us as much as we can hurt ourselves, through, bad self-talk. And you mentioned therapy, like that's a big one. My whole community, it's a very mental health forward thinking community. It's so important. If you're not going to therapy, get in there, because we all wound up with some stuff, that we got to overcome. It sounds like for you, it's trajectory. Like I'm just going to keep blazing. I got my like escape velocity back to space, right? And nothing can almost catch up.
Yeah, sometimes it is trying to just outrun it. I'll never forget the time where I sat down again with Jeff and a man named Lewis, who was another mentor of mine and another boss of mine. And there was a time, the first thing I produced was this very overwhelming project where I was bringing together like 7 different gaming brands to do a weekend live stream somewhere in a different city, in a different house, and like figuring out how you budget that. Like, I just never done any of it. And they were like, "Do you want to do that?" And I'm like, "This is an opportunity." They're pushing me to see if I can do the next thing because they know I want to always try. But I remember being so overwhelmed, like, oh my God, what do I do? How do I do? And on one hand, it was just starting, which sometimes I have to remind myself, just start. And on the other hand, it was asking. It was asking for help. It was asking for support. It was remembering that just talking about things, sometimes you realize there are support systems in place that you might not even know are there. Opportunities, whether you're looking for a job in a certain thing, an industry, or whatever, or just saying like, hey, I don't know how to do this part. And that person might themselves know or know somebody else who does. And teamwork, removing the isolation, I think helps a lot of like exponentially diminishes the challenge ahead.
So yeah, community, gosh, that is, especially ones that understand what you're trying to do, where you're at. That's beautiful, man. So let's keep it dark. Perceived failures. How do you recover from when you experience like a perceived failure?
If everything is going gangbusters, like, are you learning? Are you in a groove? Sometimes you got to bump into the rails a little bit to figure out, like, get a little uncomfortable, try something else. And so sometimes, like, I took a real big, wild, goofy risk. It's a very niche example, but while at Rooster Teeth, there was a thing that it was like a fever dream. I was like, I want to do Jeopardy because our audience loved Jeopardy and I love Jeopardy. We love trivia games, And but I was like, but I want to go weird with it. I want to do it fully live action, and I want to call it Egg Jeopardy. And I want it to be egg based. And I don't know where I was going to go from there, but like it was real Eric Andre kind of humor, real like kind of intentionally like fringing on cringy, but like being self-aware and like I don't know,
cringe.
And fringe cringe, and like I didn't know what it was going to happen with it. So sometimes it's just like having enjoyment, regardless of if it wins or not, is the way to have it. And I was grateful that the audience was like, this was super awesome. This was fresh. It was different. It wasn't for everybody, but it was fun. And but regardless of that, like failures, yeah, I think it's remembering that it's not everything. It sucks in the moment, but it's like a bad breakup. You'll have healed from it eventually. And I also I think one thing that's important is look at anybody out there. Look at artists that you love, enjoy, respect, musicians, filmmakers, photographers, whatever, and watch their journey, authors, and watch their journey, right? Brandon Sanderson talks about how he writes, and his first hit wasn't until his 13th book. And he's like, I was told that you got to write, like, you're not going to have any good books until you've written 5. And he goes, all right. So I pushed out 5 books. I just made 5 and
Pressure's
put them
off.
away. And then
they're all going to suck, right?
Yeah. And I think that this is something I have to remind myself is your resume doesn't start yesterday, and people are going to know you for what wins. They're not going to hold you accountable for what loses. But like, everyone's going to, trip and fall here and there. But like when people look back, they're going to look at what stood out.
I often talk to my apprentices. I teach blacksmithing, to my community. And, whenever they say like, oh, I failed at this, or I messed that up, and there's no such thing as failure. Like especially if you learn something, it's like, what is it? Like Thomas Edison says, like, 99 ways not to make a light bulb, right? You're always learning, and just being gentle with yourself is so difficult sometimes. Okay. This is also another question I love to ask my guests because it's always different. And what fuels your fire? As a blacksmith, what keeps that spark going, buddy?
Oh man, I think it's making just as much as I consume, or sometimes consuming more than I make, because it's and seeing what other expressions of creativity are out there that remind me that it's limitless potential of what you can make. And so there's times where I find myself going like, I just want to make something. I don't know what it is, just anything. I want to change lanes. I want to keep that lane, but I want to do this too. And now I want to try that. I don't know. I think that's what kind of keeps me going in the end, is just like making stuff is just like constantly listening to whatever my passion is of the moment. And even if it's fickle, not like I need to have the playroom where I'm like, I'm not trying to do anything with that. I'm just like, I'm sitting around trying something on my own, and then I'll forget about it. Like, just enable that. Like, it's okay if it's a phase. Like, I'll just do the next thing. It's like, so I have like the business side of creative, and then I just have the dabble side, right?
That's fantastic.
How about you? Like, what keeps you going? Is it a different project, a different challenge, like a problem to solve? Or
it's like, I've never seen that be possible. Let's make it happen.
Well, that's what it sounds like. I mean, even with the constellation stuff and going, well, this is what everyone else has done. How can I do it in a way that is different? And that's the challenge you set for yourself. And it probably also, I don't know, does it push your process? Do you learn more about the blacksmithing process doing that? Like,
absolutely. Like whenever I design, on the board, like let's take the Hobbit door, the rolling Hobbit door, for instance. Like I'm working with the client, they are, pouring this crazy cool, like Hobbit underground wine cellar. And they're like, okay, we want a cool round door. And I just like, after, and then the sparks start going, right. And then they ask, I'll ask, like, do you want it to roll? I'm just, just like a flock of doves left my mouth. I'm like, no. Like I'm trying to grab them again, because it's like, I've never seen anything like this. And they're like, yeah, absolutely. And so I'm going to the drafting table. I have no idea how I'm going to do this. I'm just like distilling my imagination down to like, what do I even think is impossible? And then reverse engineer from there. And I always feel like I'm a duplicitous type of person. Like in here, I'm like, yeah, wacky. And here we go. And then workshop me like looks at the plans and, you want me to build what?
What was I thinking? What was like one time? Because like I love this moment. It's the scariest moment, but it's the most prideful moment when you come out the other side. What's the moment where you stepped to the table and you said, I don't know what I'm doing. I might have bit off more than I can chew. And how did you feel coming out the other end? What did you learn through that?
It's my client. It's people's perception of the piece. It's they see the plan set and you see their eyebrows rise and they start getting excited, because back to passion being contagious, getting them all worked up, and we all now getting all worked up. We're opening wine and we're getting excited for the project, and then comes the grind. Then it comes to like perhaps sometimes a year of just building, sweat, soot, and blood, and then finally, it's installed. It's created. And then I get to see it in their eyes again.
Oh, man. Yeah. It's sitting in front of them. They see it in its final form, the way it was drawn up. I'm almost going to like get emotional over here, because like that's so sweet. Also, I feel like, audience, validate this. Max, you have some of the most contagious passion I've ever met.
No.
And I mean that in the best way. You are such a vibe. You could ask me to do a podcast about anything, and I'd be like, yes, absolutely. Just because it comes through the screen. And so I can only imagine how your clients feel when they feel they're dreaming big, and then they meet a dreamer, and then that person just writes it out on the page. I'm talking about you, and you bring it to them in a way that they could never envision. And they go, I can only imagine how that feels to have taken something to the 11th degree or whatever, the umpth degree, and then actualize it. Like I get giddy thinking about that for you. Like and I've also seen your projects, so I just know you're good for it,
Thanks,
but what I feel, you're very welcome. What I feel in that process is something I think I've been thinking about lately myself. I just had lunch with a good friend of mine, Wes Ellis, who just finished an amazing short film. He's going to South by. I'm just like so proud of him. And one thing we talked about was like, I feel like the process, and that's something I think that's important to talk about, is the process gets like thicker and more resistant the further you get in. Like the idea feels like magic, and you're like high on dopamine, and you're just like, I want to go. But then execution is the first hurdle, where a lot of people want to give up. And then self-measurement or audience measurement or whatever, hammer to metal that first time, that's the next hurdle. And then how do you push through those? Like, I want to ask you actually, how do you push through those dips in motivation when you're doing those projects? Is it remembering the audience or the client?
Yeah, It's so tough. Like self-motivation, like is an art form of its own, you know? I always think of it as that last like 60 to 80, or sorry, like the last 40 to 20% of a project can be such a grind. Like you're just marching through molasses and that will challenge you so hard. And like the longer the process is, the harder it can become. It's brutal and it'll challenge every piece of like tenacity, perseverance, and fortitude you think you can muster. And that's great because you continue to grow.
When you lean a little bit on what the clients, like the sparkle in their eye, when you're first starting out, because 99% of people are first starting out and struggle to find that second project, how did you get through that first project? When you maybe started doing this on your own, independent for the first time, you're seeking stability, you're afraid, you're fearful of like, can I do this? Will this happen? What pushed you then through that project?
Honestly, just the insatiable need to create, to express myself, especially growing up out in the country, just being so misunderstood. So I was a weird kid. I had a lot of issues, you know, and being like the drive to express oneself was all I needed, you know, like for then, like I was obsessed. I was possessed, you know. And I just kept building and building because I was just like, no, you don't even know. You don't even know who I am. Like, I got to get this out, you know?
No, I totally feel you. You know, before I was grateful enough to work with an amazing team filled with amazing creators and minds and support, you know, there was a window of time where, you know, I was a college kid just doing it on my own or just a goofball getting in trouble at school, right? You're, you know, just goofing off, trying to make people laugh. And I think at the end of the day, my answer is, yeah, it's just discovering the magic of making something material out of something you thought about, and the self-assurance that this is something I want regardless, but the excitement of the potential reaction. Can I make somebody laugh? Can I impress somebody? Can I, whatever it is, I wanted people to like, the second part of the magic is it's out of my head, it's material. Now it can be engaged with. It can be commented on for better or worse. And like, you just created a conversation out of thin air. I don't know. So that magic kept me going, blindly trusting whatever I was doing.
Oh my God, bud. Yes. And you mentioned humor. So you are a funny dude. You are so like irrationally funny. Like you had me in stitches when we were playing our TTRPG to get together. Like, and it's so like, you know, talking about contagious, it's infectious, but like my next question to you is like, what does humor, what position does humor have in storytelling?
Well, first of all, thank you for the kind words. I really appreciate it. I feel like my whole life has been looking backwards going, was that cringe? Is that too much? Who is that? Is it right for the audience? And I think that humor is so subjective. It's worth remembering that it will always have some audience with someone, just as anything does. But I think humor is really important because I use it in a different way to disarm conversations and open up a little bit. There's candor that could be found in humor. But I also think that there can be, Jordan Peele is an amazing example of juxtaposed emotions, right? When you're writing horror, you're exploring fear. The opposite is humor. And when you can disarm the audience with a little bit of humor and go right back into truly unsettling environments, like there's something humanizing about that, and it lets you in more. And it's something that I really appreciate about like what Fredo brings to Red Web is he's reacting to what we're talking about. And I'm laying down a story and he brings in the questions, but then he'll throw me curveballs, like I said, and we'll kind of goof off for a little bit and then we'll sneak into it again. And I love balancing. I would just like, I love putting humor into a little bit of everything. There's just something about lighting somebody's face up.
There's nothing like it.
There's nothing like it. And I found humor by the way, for anybody out there who feels the same, who's like, I'm not very funny, it's just bumping into the rails constantly and not being funny most of the time. So you get a couple of those through, you know what I mean?
Yeah, you don't make all the shots that you shoot, right?
Yeah. And I'll be sure to Venmo you for the kind compliments. So
right.
I've been accounting for all the kind words you've said. So this is really totaling up.
See, there it is. You're a funny dude, man. Like when there's so much empathy when it comes to humor. because like the humor that you bring to the table doesn't always fit with everyone. Like it's like reading the audience, trying to understand the sensibilities of the other. It's a good practice. So like, for those of you listening, like, don't be afraid to be funny. Give it a shot. This comes one of my favorite times of our conversation. I reached out. So I announced to my like patrons, my Patreon community, that I get to interview you. And I asked them to ask you, Trevor Collins, a couple questions. Big fan of the Unpredicted Party is Apex. And he asks, what compelled you to join the Unpredicted Party?
Well, Apex, I've heard your name thrown around quite a bit. It's great to hear from you directly. I'll be honest, like I saw Tori's content and I loved what she was doing. And I realized when I followed her, she was already following me. And then I stumbled into Don's content, followed him because Tori had posted something. And I just love Lord of the Rings. If you can't tell, each from here over is a different decade of like Lord of the Rings, from the 25th Silver Edition, 1981, all the way through like the 70s here and into the 60s. And
incredible.
I'm very casual. I'm not a Don. Like Don knows the world in a way I wish I could. But I love D&D and I loved what you guys were laying down. And so when Don threw out the invite, I was like, absolutely. Yes. And I also love Yes Man, Jim Carrey's Yes Man.
Yes. The power of yes, dude.
Yeah. And so I was like, why not? This sounds awesome.
You never know what'll happen. You never know. And like, I swear we have so many opportunities that are just thrown in our way constantly and we can miss them so easily. So yeah, why not say yes? What's the worst that can happen? Okay. Next question. Are you ready? Mm-hmm. This comes from a friend of mine, Harry. He's an apprentice of mine. When are we to expect the highly anticipated adventures of Beery and Kiri?
Oh, man. Listen, twofold. One, talk to Don. It has been thought about. I feel like someone's pen has hit someone's paper. And so it's not that it don't exist. I feel like it's got to happen. And on the flip side, I feel like I had some wonderful moments as Kiri or Air Kirion, and finding that character. It's very difficult. I'll admit, like to jump into an established character, feel like I know them so I can role play that as them. That's a skill that I'm still very green on. And so I felt very in my head at times. And so there's definitely like, oh, who is this character? What am I? Like, that's something I admired so much about your party, was how well built and like in character each of you were. You knew how they thought, you knew how they decided things, what they would do next. And I felt like if we do Beery and Kiri, I want it to feel like I've got that character down. You know what I mean?
Yeah, you're going to do great.
But
like you.
I would do it in a heartbeat.
You knocked our socks off. Are you kidding me? No, you were perfect. But yeah, like maybe some TTRPGs in the future. Who knows what the future holds for us?
Yeah, absolutely.
So the next one comes from Yvonne. What drives you to be so creative? What inspires your ideas?
I think it really is everything. I hate that it's like a cop-out answer, Yvonne, but like it's the movies I love, the stories they tell, how they tell it, the unique angles they use. When it's music, I'll go back to Kendrick Lamar. How concise can he say something? How can he have a triple entendre that's still super catchy and said in a very casual and cool demeanor with an amazing instrumental underneath? With
the utmost efficiency. Like, how can he fit so much into that one phrase?
Yes. And so that's what I love the most about music is deep lyricism. What are they saying? What are they talking about and why? It's understanding motifs in music, or it's just being out and understanding like anything's possible. And so just removing the guardrails and being like, what do I really want? But also that could be a double-edged sword, because I'm sitting here going, I want to write a book. I want to make an album. I want to make more Red Web. I want to start an entire other channel because I just love comic books. Whatever. But yeah, it truly is just everything, and realizing there's so much to be caught onto by looking, you know? And
that's not a cop-out answer in the slightest, Button, because I totally relate. It's not, I didn't go to school or anything like that for art or, building things. It's all around us. It's what inspires us. And that's why the arts are so important, because it is us distilling our environment, our local thoughts into creation that other people can now experience for themselves and then get inspired.
Mhm. And honestly, it's one thing, a new project I want to do. Like you see, half of these frames are empty, and it's slowly putting things together. It's not just like finding art to shove them in there and then be like, it's done. It's finding things like this is a map of Middle Earth. This is a piece of red web art that somebody painted. It's got my light reflecting on it, but that they gave me years ago. This is my fiance's podcast, Stinky Dragon. And it's just like little pieces of art, but I also have things up here that is facing me. And one project that maybe will inspire others is like, whenever I see an artist, musician, a project, a painting, whatever, and that sounds really artistic, right? But if something really sticks out to you, inspires you, kindles some sort of fire, whatever that image is, it doesn't have to be a poster or a painting. But if there's a fire that comes to you by seeing someone's performance, find an image of it that you like and frame it and just put it up. And so it reminds you. I even wrote a long time ago, and I won't tell you the word because it's a story of mine that I'll keep close to my heart, but it did come out, it did manifest in my Achievement Hunter days at Rooster Teeth, and people wore it all over the place. But there's a word that I scratched onto a notebook paper and I just stuck it to the side of my door. So every day I knew I looked at that word and it reminded me of what my North Star was. It just blocked out everything else and it kept the fire lit. And so even stuff like that.
That's beautiful. That's such a good and healthy practice to do. Like, I'm going to start doing that. Like Casey and I, at the beginning of every year, we have a word that is our, like you said, a North Star. That's genius, bud. The next question comes from Catherine. What are you most proud of creating and why?
There's two things that come to mind. And one is truly what Red Web, because it was something that in an environment at a company where I'm surrounded by brilliance and surrounded by security in a way and consistency. It was something that it was just a pure passion project, shot in the dark, new genre entirely that the company hadn't explored. And it worked and it resonated and there was an audience and I still get to do it to this day. And that's something I'm so grateful for. And it's so validating. But another one that I was really happy about was because it amalgamated a lot of things that I was proud to bring together. And it was a show, I believe you can watch it on YouTube now, at least one episode. A lot of it went away with Rooster Teeth, but I believe some people archived it. It was a show called Survive Block Island. There was 2 seasons of it, and it combined our team's inherent love of Survivor, the reality show, mixed with this game that we had been playing for years in Minecraft, mixed with all of our friends and colleagues from around the states and like being able around this kind of continent actually, and then being able to play those games and build Survivor. Like I'm such a fan that I could build Survivor games in Minecraft and produce it and host it and kind of co-direct it. And it became this huge team effort from across the company that so many people's hands touched it and every single person made it better for it. I was just so humbled to be part of it because I was like, I'll make a little YouTube series out of it. It'll be a little tough. But then almost everybody in the company came together and elevated it into this amazing thing far beyond. And so I was just so proud of it because everyone killed it.
That's
and
incredible.
So it's stuff like, yeah. And so it's stuff like that it's like this passion project mixed with, like just wanting to make something really cool and fun that spoke to a lot of things, organic, and then amazing large teamwork,
I love it, man. For some reason, I didn't realize that you were a fellow Minecrafter.
I haven't crafted in the mines for a while, but no, Achievement Hunter, again, at Rooster Teeth, there was a gaming team called Achievement Hunter. And that was one of the staple items was every week for many, many years, much to eventually our chagrin, because you do burn out on any game. But like we played Minecraft for a long time. And so
it's the best.
It's one of those really flexible sandboxes.
So cool, man. Okay. My last question for you comes from my wife, Casey. Trevor Collins, what's your dream project?
Under the guise of not fully comprehending just how much of an on-taking that is, I would love to be able to have made a short film or a feature film, something like that. But honestly, it would be anything between a full-length, like fantasy or fiction novel, a full-length album, or a full movie, right? I feel like any of one of those would be just really cool.
Where they would have to be like
done.
music composition accompaniment, right? Where you can like print that on vinyl, and then I want you to have this. I want this to happen for you.
That's an amazing question. My answer is a little vague, but yeah, I don't know. Like you can't, some incredible North Star, you know?
Yeah. When it comes to dreams, you can't hold on that tight because like, you know, you were mentioning all of the different stepping stones which you crossed to get to where you are now. Could you imagine reverse engineering that? Like, you imagine you 15 years ago, like, okay, I'm going to become you right now. It's like, no, it took so many different avenues, alleyways, and it just so many twists and winds. And like, you just got to keep it open.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Trevor, you're incredible, buddy. Those of you listening, you're incredible. God, my face hurts. Why does my face hurt so bad from grinning?
Every time with you, you know, I come off these and I got like exercised cheeks or something.
That's right. That's right, my friend. Well, I'm going to let you go. But buddy, thank you so much for having a creative conversation with me, and joining the creative workshop.
Thank you so much for having me, Max. It was a pleasure. I would happily come back anytime. And thank you for your audience as well for letting me into their space and talking about creative. I hope I inspired or helped anybody. We're all going through it in some way. So I hope I was able to knock off the rust for somebody.
Absolutely. Especially when it comes to bringing back levity. Goodbye, everyone.